Second part of the Law of One in Greek philosophy, and today we're going to talk about Heraclitus. So Heraclitus was somebody who revolutionized, again, thinking in Greek philosophy, and we're going to find out why in a minute. But one of the things that I wanted to cover is that, again, if you didn't watch the introduction and part one of Greek philosophy, it's going to make more sense if you watch just the first couple of minutes when I do the introduction to what this series is. But he is the one that was mentioned, aside from Thales, in the raw material that created this new way of thinking, and of course was influenced telepathically by the Confederation and the Law of One, of course. So we're going to see a lot of those things here, and that's why I wanted to create a one video for him, because he's going to, in essence, start the debate into one of the areas of the way we think about reality. So Heraclitus goes into my heart, really cool person and an interesting character too. So I'm not going to cover too much on that, but I'm just going to mention a couple of things. So let's go to Heraclitus, and the first thing is that he was known as the obscure or riddler, and it has to do with his personality and attitude. I'll talk about it a little bit in that. The next thing is that he was the next in line to be the king of Ephesus, and this describes a lot of his personality, something that I'll talk about too in terms of who he was. He suggested that the logos, reasoning, and the meaning of what it... I'll probably make an interjection here because it's important to mention that we in the Law of One know the logos as being the intelligence of the local part of the creator in the galaxy, and of course the sub-logos, which is something different. If you're not familiar with that, go watch the Law of One. I don't have a specific say episode or session that we talk about it. Maybe around the creation, session 13 or so, you can get more details about the logos. But that's what the logos is the intelligence of the creator and in the galaxy, and then subdivided into the stars and planets and so on. We are actually logos too, which is something that it's talked about in session 27, 28, which should be out around the time this video is coming out too. So go check that out, 27, 28, and 29. So again, going back to Heraclitus, it's important to note that logos means reasoning, or the way it's like logic. It's where we get our word logic from. So it has to do with a part of our thinking as humans. And he was the first who suggested that the logos, the reasoning, was something that permeated reality, ordering and structuring everything. You can see from here that there is already an assignment of intelligence, an intelligence outside of humans, outside of the gods, outside of physical reality, that is making everything. So I want you to keep that in mind when we talk about Heraclitus, because imagine somebody who's thinking this way and how he can decode reality just by knowing that this is the true way that everything exists, that everything is being and again, this is no god, this is no separate entity, it's just an energy that is permeating reality. That's what he suggested was the logos, a word that was later used by the Gnostics, of course, and used in that regard to also talk about this one idea. And that's where the Confederation, or Ra in the raw material, uses it to describe the intelligence of the galaxy. There's no one word, there's no names for this. It's just a way to kind of structure things for us in our thinking. So the reason why he was known as the obscure or riddler is because the way he thought, and we'll get to know a little bit more his personality here. But speaking of his personality, we can see already that he was the next in line to be the king of Ephesus, which was, a big status, something about, ego inflation. And he wasn't interested. He was actually just interested in philosophical inquiry, but not so much as we'll see, from previous thinkers, but in his own stuff. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because you can start creating the character of this person was. In fact, there's a story where they say that he was playing dice with children in the streets, and some politicians walked around him and laughed and said, like, what are you doing there playing with children? And he's something to that effect, like, isn't it better to play with children than to play politics with you good for nothings? So he was very much against society, and he was just interested in real stuff, playing with children in the streets, where he was supposed to be, you know, king, or at least somebody high rank, you know, in the whole structure of society back then in Ephesus. So you can already see his character and why he was so deep into this type of thinking. So, all right, let's go on with the next couple of things that I have from him. And yeah, well, the masses were blind to the logos by their conceptions of the apparent self. This is something that he said a lot, that people were basically blind to the logos because, or the intelligence that was permeating everything, because their ego, in essence. I'll expand this a little bit, but there was also that there was no way to teach the logos. This is something huge. Lastly, the logos could be discerned individually if one did inner seeking. So let's pause here. We have more to cover from Heraclitus, but first, his disdain for the masses was because he saw that nobody wanted to dive into this reality. This is why he was also called the weeping philosopher, because, and it's also depicted in many of the artwork as somebody who was sad, or it had this type of attitude. But it seems like it was a lot from that, from the way he saw the people, the masses, you know, everybody around him was oblivious to this beauty that existed, you know, inside. And you can see that when he said that there was no way to teach the logos, this is some really, really profound thinking too, because this is something that we know. We see in our studies of the Law of One and any other material, especially Eastern philosophy, that there's no way to teach this stuff. There's no way. This is like the Tao, which I'll mention a couple of times in this series. The Tao cannot be explained, nor can the Zen be taught. This is Zen Buddhism I'm talking about. So he had the same idea. The logos cannot be explained. The logos can be pointed at maybe, but it cannot be explained. And he would say that the logos could be discerned individually if one did inner seeking, which is something that we know now. We can only see, say, intelligent infinity, or contact intelligent infinity, as we know it in the Law of One, through meditation or contemplation, or just using it. It's a potential. It's not something you can point at or explain or create a concept or an idea. So Heraclitus was really on point on this, and I suppose it was really hard on him to know this stuff and not being able to explain it to others, but just to, and this is why other ancient philosophers really, really struggled to understand his ideas, because he was trying to explain something, or trying to express something that was really hard to express. So that's what Heraclitus was. We got more, like I said, which fascinating stuff. So Heraclitus also said, or was very unlike his predecessors, because Heraclitus arrived at his system by inner contemplation and not by the work of other people. His system was based on three principles, which were, again, we're going to see them come over and over again over time in this series. The first one is that everything is in flux. Second, that the world was a perpetual fire or flame, and I'll explain this. And also that war was the father of all. He said, and it's quoted to say, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. And lastly, in this slide, I have that fire as the essence of reality was the way that he was symbolically referring to how reality works, is what moves and changes all. Again, we can see how obscure his discourse was because of the things he would say. It was hard for other people to grasp the idea or the meaning of what he was trying to say. 2,600 years almost after him, or definitely after him, we can see that we now understand, or at least can make a lot of sense, whereas ancient philosophers struggle to try to understand this. So again, he didn't follow the teachings or the thinking of other philosophers. So he was not influenced by others, but by his own way of thinking and his own research, let's say, which he said was inner contemplation. The three principles that he explained was that everything is in flux. We know this. Nature is never static. Nature, and we part of nature, the cosmos, is, like I say, cosmoing. The cosmos is cosmosing, if you will. It's a process of just creating, moving. It's actually, you can see it as a wave. It's just moving. So the world was a perpetual fire or flame, and this is something that was also, to me, it was wrongly conceptualized by saying that everything was fire or that fire was the element. What he meant, and I infer this from what I can read from him and the way he expressed himself, was that the world was a fire that was just, fire was symbolic. Again, like in the last part I say the fire as the essence of reality is not the fire was the element, like say Anaximenes or Thales said about air and water being the arche. He meant that the fire itself was a way to see how everything's changing. A flame doesn't remain static, even though we can see a candle flame. It's always moving, you know. It's always rejuvenating itself, and it's in constant flux in that way. And the other one that we're going to explain a little bit more, just in a little bit, is that war was the father of all. And I'll leave that for the end. But these were the type of thinkings that Heraclitus had. And by saying that no man steps on the same river because the river is not the same and the man is not the same, he's talking about that one flame, that everything is in flux. Not only is the water flowing, it has nothing to do with the example itself of the water flowing, but the river is changing constantly. Everything that makes up, even the water itself, is changing. And the same thing with people. People are changing. Our cells die, but even beyond cells, things are moving. So even at the smaller scale, everything is just moving and changing. So that's what Heraclitus meant, and that's what he's known for. So we're going to go into the last slide that I have, where I have that, well, these Stoics, which existed or started actually around his time, but were more known hundreds of years later, they identified his fire with the logos. And this is very important because the logos, as I explained, is the intelligence, and fire, the way he described it, sounds like the intelligence that moves and changes everything. He also said that the soul of a man was fire. Makes sense. He saw strife or conflict as good, unlike other philosophers. Strife is justice, he wrote. And all things are in constant conflict by opposing forces. This is why he said that war was the father of all, because war is conflict, or conflict is tension, and tension is opposite polarity, just pulling at each other, but was the father of it all. That struggle between polarities is what Heraclitus was talking about. So you can see why, again, his language was very obscure for other philosophers, because they couldn't understand literally what he was saying. So again, like I said, the Stoics identified the logos with fire, and this is the same fire that he was talking about, is a constant change that is, it's making everything move and evolve, if you will. And also the part of strife being justice, like he said, is not that strife is bad. Strife was equated to evil in the past because there was a sense of righteousness, and it still is at this moment. You can see that Western thought hasn't changed in that way, that we still think that strife, conflict, or evil is something that we need to battle. There is no need to battle. It's almost like saying positive needs to battle negative, or negative needs to battle positive. If one of them wins, both of them get obliterated. So, but this was not, unfortunately, part of Western thought, and it still isn't to this point, to a large degree. And I think Heraclitus got it right when he said the strife is justice, meaning that strife is what makes everything. All things are in constant conflict by opposing forces. I don't think there's any other way that 2,600 years ago he could have explained it in a way that would make sense in terms of how this works. I think that's why he was frustrated. I think that's why he was known as the weeping philosopher, like I said. But he gave such an amazing information, even to us now that study the law of one, and we can see the parallels of all these things that he would explain back then, now in the law of one. So this is why I was so excited when I read about Heraclitus and Ra mentioning him. And there are others that I'm going to make videos about, of course, that are going to come out, and they're basically the offshoot of these thinkings, and that would kind of give form to the ideas that Plato and Aristotle had in the future. But this was a huge one for me, and a huge one for them too, and any other Western thinker back then. So that's it. That's all I got about Heraclitus. Next one's going to be about Parmenides, which was another figure who caused some trouble in thinking back then. And it was thanks to him that we created a different type of philosophy in the future after him, of course. And I couldn't let him out of the equation. So next video is going to be about Parmenides. I'll see you then.